topic today is called Crucial Conversations, Mastering Them, and I'm going to explain a little bit about what that is. But before I do that, I wanted to introduce our panelists. And Tara, I'm going to start with you. If you could maybe just tell everybody that's in our session today a little bit about your background.
Certainly. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tara Acton. I'm the Director of Claims for Lumen Technologies. We changed our name in the last couple weeks from CenturyLink. We are a wide-ranging technology company that has a legacy telecommunications business that does your fiber optics and your broadband connections, as well as some very sophisticated security networking for large multinational companies. I've been in my role for about 13 years. I have a legal background, and I was in private practice for many years before joining the risk management department at one of the predecessor companies for Lumen. So really excited to be here. My scope of responsibility at Lumen is for the workers' compensation program, as well as the auto liability and general liability programs.
Tara, to see your face and talk to you as well. I think the audience is going to have a great time hearing from you. And Marijo, I can see your face and I can hear you. And I know you had a few technical difficulties in the opening with Kimberly. And we're really happy to have you too. And I know a lot of the audience, but maybe not everybody, heard your background in the opening remarks. So maybe if you could spend a couple minutes just helping everyone understand where you come from. And I learned, as I told you before, that you were from South Dakota. So we had a good discussion about our common love for the state of South Dakota. So tell everybody a little bit about you and your involvement.
Absolutely, Kathy. And you'll notice I don't have my video camera on at this point. So you're going to hear my voice and not see me live, and trying to preserve try not to repeat the problems that we had in the first session. So I apologize for that. I'm super excited to talk about crucial conversations. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart for sure, and we'll probably learn about that why as we talk about it. I'm a nurse by background. I started in the work comp industry as a case manager. I was did a lot of work in South Dakota, Minnesota, and the Midwest through the company called Alaris, which we eventually sold to Paradigm in 2016. And so now I'm part of the Paradigm family, and I run the Complex Care Solutions division, which is largely case management for that company. Personally, I'm a mother of 4 boys, so you'll hear me talk about that in these crucial conversations. And then I now have 6 granddaughters. So
oh my goodness.
There's definitely a sense of humor out there in the universe, because I had all these boys and now have all these girls, and I'm learning to have conversations in a whole different way, not just at work, but at home. And I think everything that we talk about here and learn today will apply in both places, right?
Absolutely. Appreciate that background. And I'm going to come back to the 6 granddaughters here shortly, Marijo, so be prepared. My name is Kathy Tazic, and I am Managing Director at Sedgwick. I'm responsible for our customer relationships for the United States. I've been with Sedgwick for 29 years. It'll be 30 years in next July. And the hallmark of my career has been change. And because when I started at my company, there were about 800 people, and there are now 27,000 people. So lots of change and growth. And through that, had to really learn how to manage this topic. And I want to talk a little bit about kind of why we chose this and what it's all about. Kimberly George, who's one of my very best friends on the planet, and I had this conversation when I started to read this book, and it's called Crucial Conversations, Tips for Talking When the Stakes Are High. And one of my responsibilities development program, a way to help people deal with conflict. I tell the personal story all the time that I was raised in a very conservative Catholic household where we were taught not to talk about anything that was very serious, or to avoid conflict at all costs, basically. And I think we, and then when I got into the work world, I really had to figure out how to have them, because in the workplace you aren't allowed to avoid hard discussions, and it's obviously a very important skill, particularly as I was coming up in our industry of workers' compensation, and kind of starting out in the early 90s here. Things were a lot different for women than they are now. So a lot of the conversations that I had to have with my employer, who's the same employer I've had, as you know, for a long time. So these concepts that we talk about in the book is used with Fortune 500 companies a lot to help managers deal with conflict and conversations. And I find that for me, being raised in an environment where we didn't deal directly with hard things, it was very helpful, not just from a work perspective, but very, very helpful from a personal perspective. So Marijo talked about the 4 boys, which those conversations are different when they're growing up. And then the 6 granddaughters, where you get to have more broad, different conversations. I find when we have these, when we do this is a training program that we do a lot at Sedgwick. People leave saying, I thought about a lot of this personally, and I know for me, working with others about it has really helped me in my personal life to try to be better prepared when I'm having conversations that I don't want to have, and we all have them. So a couple of just basics about the concepts. How do we define a crucial conversation? There's 3 common things that they need to have. One of them is the stakes need to be high. So it needs to be an important conversation. And that definition obviously is up to you. Strong emotions, not hard for us to think about times when that would happen. And then where there are opposing opinions. So you know that the reaction to the conversation you have might not be what you'd like it to be. So we all can think of situations in our lives, be it work or personal, where you've had those kind of 3 elements all come together. And we give a couple of tips about this when we talk to people about it. It's really kind of, and obviously working on yourself first. So starting with you, work on you. What do you want to get out of that conversation? What the other person needs to. And then the key to it all is making the conversation safe for both parties, yourself included. So get yourself to a place where you feel safe with the words you're going to use, the concepts you're going to use, and how you're going to go about that. And then kind of let the other person help you down and explore some of the paths that exist. And the other thing too about this is that you want to have the end result be something that you leave feeling good about. I know for me, I have a lot of anxiety in advance of conversations like this. And so I do a lot of kind of preparation so that I don't hurt the other person's feelings, things and that kind of thing. And then end these conversations with, know beforehand, what's your call to action? What is it that you want to happen at the end of that? And I find that particularly effective in the work situations, because I usually start with, here's where we want to go in this discussion, so that everybody can understand what the beginning, and then we can let people have all of the get their feelings out about it, but also try to let people be heard, but stick to the kind of working through some of those separate conversations. So I have a couple of things that I want to have the group talk about, and I don't think we still don't have Andrea, but we're going to have Tara and Marijo answer some of these questions and see if we can get some conversations going about this. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the book concepts too. We all have important conversations at work or at home. I know we all have both. So what do you do to prepare if you know you're having an important work meeting or a personal conversation? Do you have specific things you do to get yourself in the right frame of mind for that? And Marijo, let's start with you.
Sure. I do. I think it's important, and I have to work at this a little bit, getting myself ready for those conversations. To some of the points you just talked about, Kathy, I want to make sure that I understand the importance of the conversation and the meaning of the conversation, both to me and, you know, my audience member, the person I'm having the conversation with, really make sure I have clarity about that. And then to your point, what we're trying to achieve, what is that end result, and really kind of, you know, boiling that down into those 3 buckets prior to a conversation is great when we have the opportunity. Sometimes these crucial conversations happen on the fly, right? And you don't get as much time to prepare, but when you do, those are 3 buckets. That time, and when they do seem to happen on the fly, I do try to find a way to, you know, to delay them or to, you know, schedule them out, because that also allows me to filter out the emotion from the conversation, right? We can't always control the other person and their emotions, but I want to try to get my emotions out of the conversation whenever I can. I'll give you an example of this, because I think examples are great in these conversations. I recently it was a newer employee that said something to me kind of in passing that I thought was maybe a little inappropriate. It kind of made me mad. And I was being a little sensitive, which can happen, right? But either way, I felt like it's not going to do either of us any good, and we're not going to get to a good end result until I filtered that emotion out, right? So, you know, I waited a couple days, I stewed on it, I processed, I really said, okay, what was the essence of that conversation that was upsetting to me? And how do I guide this person so that this, first of all, doesn't happen again? And he or she understood what was that trigger, right? Or what was said. And so that was kind of the end result, you know, really identifying the end result. So I think that's really helpful when you can just, you know, filter out that emotion prior to having those conversations.
Yep. Totally agree with that. Tara, what about you?
So I definitely agree that you can have the spontaneous ones that you don't expect to be those crucial conversations that hit you all of a sudden, as well as the ones that you plan, the ones that you know going in are, as you present something or advocate for something, will be much more challenging. And so I'll sort of concentrate on that latter one. I think that what I do is really plan ahead. And one of the things that I've learned at the leadership classes that have been made available is thinking about influence and the type of person you are, as well as the group that you're talking to. And we have read, you know, a Harvard Business Review journal on the new science of team chemistry that talks about kind of what type of people they are. And I think it's really important to know your audience and to think about the best way to influence those people. It helps to control the emotion, to figure out and plan your points, and to have the most impact on your delivery and having a controlled conversation, and then also perhaps increasing your chances for getting the result that you're looking for. So I definitely agree with Marijo about the planning, taking the emotion down, and then really trying to expect and analyze the situation and tailor your message to your audience and what your goal is. So I think it's very important to plan those conversations when the time for planning occurs, and it's not that spontaneous conversation.
Tara, I want to say, I'm going to add, Kathy, just one thing, because to Tara's point, you know, that planning is so critical. Sometimes I'll even go as far as scripting it out, writing out. I don't know if you go this far, or maybe you don't need to completely script it out, but build an outline, you know, in terms of those critical points that you want to hit in that conversation. And I don't know, Kathy, if those kinds of activities help you, you mentioned earlier on that, you know, these conversations don't come really easy, but does that preparedness help you kind of enter into those conversations. And I see that being a question in our chat too. If you're not real comfortable, sometimes that preparedness helps you get to that conversation a little easier.
Yeah, and I find for me, because I'm a not structured, I'm full of anxiety, and I know Kimberly's on here and she knows this, and also not a really big structured person. So I find too, I'm much more comfortable than if I take the time to specifically achieve. So I'm always remembering that and not focusing how I feel about it. Taking that emotion out of it works really well for me. And I do it not just at work. I do it in my personal kids or my friends or my family, because if I do it that way, it takes the anxiety out of it a little bit, not all the way.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to get out of it and what they need out of it. And I think that's one of the things that we work with a lot of. Kimberly and I at Sedgwick work with a lot of young women. And I think if I younger self some of these things early on, some of the situations I had probably would have gone better because I would have been able to think through them as opposed to feeling like I wanted to just say whatever I thought and really that factual, non-emotional conversation. But it's harder when you're younger. I have a 20-year-old daughter, 2 sons, 2 Marijo, but not 4. We have very crucial conversations all the time. And I found myself doing this with her too, because we have opposing views on lots of things, which most mothers of 20-year-olds can relate to. And I find I have to like research some things almost to be ready for that. But it does make me feel better when I have to talk to her about something that's, uncomfortable for both of us, because neither of us really love conflict all that much. Although you wouldn't know it if you were with us.
Kathy, just to add something to what Mary Jo said about sort of scripting and planning, one of the things that I have learned or a tool I was given was a sort of structured chart about, who are the parties involved, what are you asking for, how vested are they, what's your trust relationship with that person, really breaking it down into different components to then plan out that conversation. So I totally agree with your comment about sort of your younger self. I certainly is a skill I've developed over time. And I've gotten feedback on it. I distinctly remember one supervisor at Lumen who, it was a very emotional conversation. I probably was not ready for it. And I was much more emotional. And a couple weeks later, she's like, you remember that conversation? Well, you didn't come across very powerful because it was all emotion. And just a tidbit, if you, looking at your career going forward, you need to have that in check. And I have remembered that conversation many times. And I do think that this is another woman. I think I may have been a little bit more casual or expected her to be more accepting, not to give me that sort of feedback. And it was really beneficial that I've kept with going forward.
Yeah, I want to move to this, to the examples. I know, Mary Jo, you mentioned examples. And, I'm going to share something that's, again, I look back at my younger self a little more than I'd like, I think. But, some examples of when things worked and then maybe one from each of you where it didn't work. I think Tara just mentioned one, and that you learned from it. And one of the first things I learned in my career is to always take advantage of those learnings, and always apply them to everything you do. If that skill is immeasurably important, in career and life. So I tell the story that and this is very paramount, I think, to the mission of the Alliance, to raise women up. And as a young woman in the 90s working at my current company when it was very small, I realized that I had I had disparity in my salary. So this is going back to maybe 1993 with somebody who did the exact same job, but was paid more. And we're not talking about a lot here. We're talking about a small amount of money, but I felt and knew that I was doing significantly more work than the person. So kind of have to keep in mind too, again, that it's like 1993, so it's not yesterday. And I thought about it, and I went into my boss thinking I was doing the right thing. And I said, well, I'm looking for a raise, but I'm hoping that at my review, you will at least consider that this person who's told me they're making more money than me. It's not that that you'll think about that, because here are the things I've been doing. And I didn't compare myself, but I just said, we're talking about a small amount of money. Yes, I was young and not really if you think about the time I'm talking about too, the era of this, got a long lecture about how I should never do that again. And now you wouldn't be able to do that, but in 1993 or 4 you could, but also got the raise the next day, because really, and I had male bosses a long time in my current career, not always, but back then that was seen as a woman bringing that to the attention of a leader was not a normal thing. I feel now, I always call myself the Norma Ray, where I feel like I paved the way for the other young ladies coming up. But I learned from that while the reaction I got initially was the result I got, which was the salary parity a long time ago, but also kind of the respect that I saw in the response after the initial anger. I remember that, and I tell people, like, if somebody tells you never do that again, you have to kind of think about what was that end result. So I thought it went poorly, but it actually turned out well once the other person really considered it and thought about it. So that's just one of those personal examples for me. I have plenty of personal ones where they didn't go well, but we'll get into those at some cocktail hours some other time. But Tara, maybe could you share a couple of examples of when you did that kind of a difficult conversation?
Yeah. So my company, Lumen, has been through multiple transformations and mergers and acquisitions. And each time, you're looking at the risk management function on both sides to decide, kind of who's going to stick around and lead the claims organization. And those have been very charged, crucial conversations about the future. And I would say what I did in those sort of big to, what should you get to keep your job? Why are you doing a good job managing claims? I think that you have your facts. You plan, you go in there confident, not cocky, but you know your stuff. And we had presented to, the treasurer of the company to really show your value. And I'm still here. So the planning, doing having good data and being prepared, those, because you get really tough questions. Why are you spending so much money on claims and not taking it as an attack? Those are valid questions, because we do spend a lot of money, and really, not feeling like it's an attack, trying to be as even keeled about it, even though it's a very important conversation for your future, your family, what's going to happen. Those were some of the toughest conversations I've had as we've gone through some very challenging mergers and acquisitions over my tenure.
Yep. Marijo, how about you? I know you're going to have several examples with all these kids, grandkids.
All my kids. I have to tell you, I too, with you guys, as I was thinking ahead for this presentation, I was channeling my younger self, right? And much like you, Kathy, in a time that was different, I was working at an insurance company, and I was really young in my career, and I remember being pulled into, and it was so impactful. I remember being, sitting down and having this conversation with my boss, and he was telling me that I was pulling too much of my personal life into work. Now, in hindsight, I was 20-something, young 20s. I probably was, right? But I look back, I can reflect back on that conversation. I didn't receive that well, right? I got defensive. I probably got, brought in some emotion. And in looking and knowing what we know now and looking at this book, I think, was I in a safe environment where, you look at some of the science and some of the techniques that the book Crucial Conversations really promotes. And I probably wasn't, but I was also, really young. And I think, oh my gosh, it was just not, it was not a conversation that went well. And you know what, that particular boss and I never really had a great working relationship, for the time that he was my boss at that company. And I think there are things so many things to learn when we have great conversation. And I think there are things to learn and dissect when we are either, the receiver or the giver in some of these conversations, because we can really learn. Either way, I view these crucial conversations as gifts, right? And if you look back in your career history, some of the most important changes that you made were from either a successful or a failed crucial conversation, either, again, as you were the recipient or the giver. And I do look at those. Going back. I mean, Kathy, I have probably the opposite problem of you. I tend to be, and I know there's some paradigm people on here, so they're probably all going to laugh when I say this, because I tend to be overly direct and somewhat confrontational.
Yeah.
And so in what we were talking about earlier, I have to prepare myself, and I have to kind of scale that back when I'm going to really try to reach somebody. And I have 4 boys, and my youngest one calls me out on this all the time, because I'll just kind of enter a conversation and kind of get right to the meat of something. And he'll say, "Good morning, Mom. I'm doing great. How are you?" He'll really call me out, like, could you at least greet me before you're asking me, what I'm doing next semester or something like that. And so, it is, Linda in the chat over here talked about a little bit about, involving that emotional intelligence in those conversations. And Tara, you talked about really understanding, who you are into a conversation and reading your audience and knowing how they're going to react and read somebody. I think all of that applies. And I think about this over and over when I think about my youngest son, because he calls me out on this all the time.
Yeah.
Well, I like the call out, Marijo, to one of the comments in the chat. One of it's gone, so I'm not sure who said it, but there was a suggestion that she even plans out sort of questions and potential answers, and then if the questions don't come, suggesting or trying to direct the conversation, because that might be a way for you to hit some of your points and move the conversation forward. And I think that's a great suggestion. I have certainly done that, where you are you might not want that to be part of your initial points, but you're ready, right? You're expecting a certain reaction, and there might be some really good reasons to hit those points. So great shout out to whoever said that. Planning ahead on, really where you think it might go. And if it isn't going that way, but it's still something that's really important, see if you can interject that into the conversation.
Yeah, the emotional intelligence. And then I love the comments, creating oxygen in yourself, taking those deep breaths. One of my greatest mentors at Sedgwick taught me a great trick. When you want to respond to something, put it in your draft inbox, your email, and then look at it the next day and see if you still want to send it. And most times you won't. And now I don't even do that anymore because I'm past it. But it is worth the minute to take the step back, whether that's taking a drink of water in the conversation, taking those sips of air we do in yoga, or taking the deep breath, or waiting till the next day if it's in writing, which I think was great advice, even at the time, which is, again, a long, long time ago.
Kathy, I would say I had a recent example where we were having many crucial conversations about a topic, and then there was a zinger. It's a very emotionally charged relationship, and I have had to learn with this individual to really step back. And I read his email very late at night. I felt very empowered to write a point-by-point response as to why. I then I sent it to my boss because that was okay. I said, can I send this? And the next morning before she had responded, I said, I've slept on it. It's not appropriate. I have all my points that I can say in a much better way if the conversation continues. But having that breath and that time made me realize that I just needed to tone it down. So that extra time really can matter.
That's a great example, Tara.
That is it.
There are people who will push your buttons. And I think having the awareness, probably not too hard to know you have the awareness when you're having it. And with this individual, I plan. Every conversation, I have an agenda when I have to present. Or even really just any conversation with him. And I breathe very deeply and try not to get into the tit for tat, which is what we did at the beginning of working together. And now things seem to be better because I control my emotions. And
they're better, Tara. That's a good thing, right?
Incrementally, yes.
Right.
And it's a process. And I can't say enough. Breathing deeply and thinking thoughtfully before responding. And things have seemed to improve. So it can happen.
So we have an interesting question in the chat. I'm going to pivot to it because I think it's an interesting it could go really off the rails for a long time. So let's go there, see how this all works out. So there's a question about, how do you overcome to not have the conversation, especially with it doesn't have to be men, but so how do you create safety during that? And it's interesting because that's kind of where we were headed next in terms of the 3 things you can do about one of these. You can avoid it, which is how I was raised. You can do them really poorly, or you can do it really well. And the whole goal of this whole conversation is to just help people with some other people's experiences and ideas on how you can think about, doing them better. What I do and what I've had to do in this situation is learn from mistakes, which has been my best teacher as a female in the workplace. And that story I told earlier really did shape how I looked at things going forward. And I learned from experience that if I, every time I didn't have a conversation that I wanted to express myself, I always regretted it later. So I got through that by learning from that conversation I talked about earlier. And then you do learn, though, I think, as you go through your career, that you kind of your battles when you feel very strongly about something, knowing that you have a safe person to maybe test it out on, which I do with Kimberly a lot before I have the conversation, or again, writing it down. But I think the only way to get over the avoiding doing it is to actually do it well and have some success. And to have the success, those tips we talked about, I think, are important. And I don't know, Marijo or Tara, if you have other comments. I think it's a great question.
Well, I can jump in, Tara, if you don't mind. I saw that question too. And, first of all, avoiding the conversations. Even somebody who tends to be really direct, some of these conversations are hard, right? That's why they're crucial. And they are hard. And you have to your point, the better you get at them, and to Kathy, you say it's like I'm never super comfortable with them. I mean, because they're hard and they're emotionally charged and they're opposing views, they're always going to feel a bit uncomfortable, even when we're experts at them. But I love what you just said about becoming as good as you can be, preparing and delivering them, seeing some success, because that just makes them more comfortable. The other thing I think in preparation and how to avoid that is remember that even though these are hard, that these are a gift. This is a learning opportunity. You're giving somebody something, even though it might not be something they're ready to hear or they want to hear, a way for them to improve and grow and change or evolve. And when you take a look at it from, just kind of tilt the lens a little bit and look at it from that angle, it kind of becomes just a little bit easier to deliver it, because it's like, I'm really going into this pure of heart with good intentions to give this person something that they clearly don't have, right? And that, to me, that just looking at it from that little bit different angle really helps me a lot. And then I'm going to call out another comment here in terms of creating safety. And Jody said, active listening. And oh boy, that is a crucial part of a crucial conversation, if I can use that term, because that's part of how you create a safe environment for somebody, right? You have to not only talk and, deliver the facts and let them have time to process emotionally, but you also have to listen and let them feel really heard. That helps to create that safe environment, I think.
Oh, I totally agree, Mary Jo. And one of the comments, I think it was from Kimberly, George, mentioned role playing and practicing. And I think to the extent you can have a friend, someone you feel close with at work, to sort of have those conversations, to prep for some of those crucial conversations, I think is invaluable. And getting feedback on perhaps where the person is coming from. I think it's something that I have been working on, is the empathy to understand someone else's position, and having the awareness and emotional intelligence to kind of have that full picture and not just come at it from my beliefs or the position I want to argue from, and my emotional, being emotionally vested in the point I'm making. So really having that, person at work that you might be able to role play, bounce ideas off of, and help hone your message, I think is great. So really look for that partner who you guys can really work on those skills together.
I totally agree.
I don't know if you guys are seeing Andrea's comment in here, because she's supposed to be part of our panel today. It's due to some technical difficulties, she's not on. But I think what she's saying here is great too. The only thing that is more challenging than a hard conversation is a delayed conversation about a crucial subject. And really putting a plan to get that elephant out of the room just allows a path for everything to move forward in a better, more cohesive, smoother manner. So I loved her comment there.
Yeah, I think and I'm guilty of that. So I understand. And I think we've got a bunch of comments too about how the anxiety builds the longer you wait. And I learned that my anxiety was always worse than the actual outcome of the conversation.
Yes.
I think for so many things.
My worst fear was always my worst fear coming true. So, and one other thing I think would be good to talk about is personal style. And I know Mary Jo and I, and Tara, probably you too, I'm a direct communicator as well. So if I'm giving feedback or I'm talking about a topic, I like to get to what it is. I can read the paragraph, but I want to, get directly to what we need to address. And I think one of the things that kind of helped me, I had some executive coaching a few years back where they helped me with this, was I ask a lot of questions, but I actually tell people up front before we start a conversation, particularly people that don't work with me. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions as we're having this conversation. I'm not being rude. It's not that I don't respect your position. My personal style has made a world of difference at work, where I got the feedback and I knew that people thought I was aggressive, and I am, but it's not because I didn't have good intentions. It's just because my style, my head was trying to get to the point, and I needed to let people get to the point in their way, but asking questions really changed a lot of my interaction. So I'm wondering if either of you have style advice or approaches you've had to think through like that.
I was caught by your suggestion, Kathy, or your comment about asking questions. I do, for me, asking questions can be a way to buy some time to formulate my thoughts and perhaps get a little bit more under control. And I think it can help you get information from the other side to really understand where they're coming from. I don't want to harp on the empathy, but the coaching I have received lately is just trying to be more open and understanding about where other people are coming from. So that has helped bring some of the emotional charge of the conversation sort of out of it to try to figure out where that person is coming from.
Kathy, I think your call out here about, really being able to, especially if somebody doesn't know you well and you're having a conversation like this is my style, please, even asking for feedback on how they like to be talked to, so that you have a better understanding of that, as either prior to or when you go into a conversation. I don't know if you guys have ever read the book Switch. I don't know if that's a book you've ever read. It's called How to Change When Change is Hard. And crucial conversations are often, not always, but often, are surrounding around a change, right? That you want to help somebody through, or to get to something. And in that book they talk about the rider and the elephant. And this was such a good visual for me, because the rider is like the intellectual part of somebody and the elephant is the emotional part of somebody. And notice the elephant is typically bigger than the rider. And I tend to live, Kathy, like you, kind of in that direct, probably intellectual part, right? And
Right.
I tend to like, here's the facts, here's what we're going to do. Let's, kind of get to that. And in the book Switch, they really talk about, to move somebody or something along, you've got to address both parts. Right? That intellectual, the rider and the elephant have to work together to really get somebody into a place. And it's kind of a goofy analogy, but it's always stuck with me, this rider and this elephant. So as you are working from a style perspective, if like for me, I know that I tend to be in that intellectual section very hard, very heavy. I have to work to prepare my conversation to also touch on that emotional side, no matter who it is. And for some people more than others. Tara, to your point, empathy and understanding your audience and things like that. So that's something, from a style perspective that I've had to adapt to. And, I'm probably more successful at it some days than others, honesty.
Aren't we all, right?
But.
And I think for me, just being more authentic and I think that's easier as you get through your career. Letting people know you a little bit better so that they understand where you're coming from, not feeling like you have to be one way at work and one way when you're not. You want to be yourself in all the ways you can while being professional. That's another thing that I think, everybody at any age can really feel better all the time by really being yourself and finding the ways that all those of us who've had to adjust in our careers, finding the ways that you adjust, but still allow you to leave work every day knowing that you're being your authentic self. I think that's something too. And we've only got a couple minutes. I know they want to give people a chance to go into the networking, but any last minute advice, Tara or Marijo, for the audience on this topic or what you think people should be thinking about?
I was just, Andrea just made a comment in the chat that I thought maybe we should share. As mentioned, know your audience is important, also very important to know your volume. Many instances warrant you to be a more active listener than controlling the entire dialogue. Speaking more does not necessarily equate to a better message. I think that definitely something that resonates with me, that I can just keep talking. And you can keep going. So I think that was an important part for Andrea to share with the group.
Yeah, for sure. Mary Jo, any last minute?
Well, I just want to say thank you to our audience. I mean, so interactive, such great points, such great questions. It has really allowed this for me to take away some pearls from this conversation, as well as we hope that we were able to give some today. So I just want to say thanks.
Yes, I really enjoyed having all of you here, and I'm so happy to participate in this great event by a great group of women. It's great to see people pulling each other up as opposed to pushing each other down. So awesome. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the day, and thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.